It's been more than 30 years since the Nagaland Liquor Total Prohibition Act 1989 was legislated. The NLTP Act prohibits all forms of alcohol, alcohol production, manufacture and consumption. It also prohibits buying, selling and storing liquor in the state. While the positive intentions of the Act continue to form a value system of its own within the Christian religious community in the state and the older generation, the recent decades have also seen gradual conversations in the state if the NLTP Act was at all helping. Several community organizations have even perhaps for the first time in recent memory come out openly asking the government to lift the Act. An opinion that would not only raise eyebrows 2 decades ago but would have met with severe condemnation. The debate about whether or not to lift the NLTP Act continues, and apparently it sounds more vocal than before. There are, however, both advantages and disadvantages. Besides, there also are complex social and political realities that cannot be solved by merely lifting prohibition. We will be discussing some of these aspects with our associate editor Almuli and what might be the way forward for those who consume alcohol and those who don't. Alright, so thank you so much for joining me on this special newsroom. We are yet here again on another newsroom speaking about the Nagaland Total Liquor Prohibition Act again, sir. So now coming back, rejigging our memory a bit, sir. So what were some of the main reasons the NLTP Act was first legislated in Nagaland decades ago, sir?
Yeah, thank you, Akivi. Could you repeat the question?
So, I mean, like, what were some of the main reasons as to why the NLTP Act was legislated decades ago?
Oh yeah, I think the heart of the Nagaland Liquor Total Prohibition Act was grounded in Christian values. Way back when Nagaland state was instated in 1963, the founding fathers felt that the people of Nagaland should have a moral grounding. And one of these moral grounding was that our life should be based on the Christian principles and the Christian teachings, which should be our guideline, our life guidelines. And I think growing from that, there was a time when substances such as liquor started coming into Nagaland, mainly through Assam. And I believe that it was during the time, especially during the 70s, there was a great revival movement, Christian revival movement across Nagaland. And I think it was during the time that there was an opportunity for those in the faith to make a pledge, a social pledge for the community that will, I think, that will, how do you put it, bless the future of the generations to come from the state. So I think it was based on such kind of a moral history that the church community, especially because the church during those times, they exerted a lot of influence on the local people and their faith. They were seen as the guardians of the local people's faith. So, excuse me, in 1989, I think the act came about as a result of that faith, of that moral foundation, the moral guideline that the NBCC provided to the people. So, I think even the slogan of the nationalist groups, Nagaland for Christ, was grounded on this Christian faith. It was not that they were going to take that faith and turn it into something negative, something violent, but it was seen as a moral beacon for the people, including even the nationalist organizations. So the origin of the Nagaland Liquor Total Prohibition Act came from that faith, Akivi.
All right, sir. The NLTP Act is once again in contention, and then gladly, or rather surprisingly, over the past few months or over the years, we have seen certain groups or organizations and even our Naga leaders, I mean, like, who have now at least have the courage to speak about this particular act in open. So what changed along the way that even some community organizations have now dared to openly call for lifting the act, sir?
Oh yeah, it's very interesting. 30 years ago, you would never imagine in your wildest mind speaking up in support of liquor in any way, Akivi. Even during our times when we were growing up during the 90s, the idea of anyone supporting alcohol was not something you would do, because if you did something like that, you would not only be condemned by everyone, but you will also be expelled by your village, by your church. There was no way you could run. You would be declared an antichrist, okay? And it is shocking for those of us who have seen those days, and those of us here who are saying the situation change. Is surprising. And I think the reality here is that, of course, those days nobody talked about revenue from alcohol or drugs, but the reality here is that there are a lot of political underplaying in here, Akivi. We're not just talking about a moral standing, we're not talking about the Christian faith or the guidelines that our faith gives us to live a morally correct life. There are also realities of economics, of feeding the family, of starting businesses, which link into the, let's say, the local economy, which translates into revenue for the government. So there are a lot of complicated, complex socio-political realities here at play. And over the past about 20 years, we have seen a lot changing in Nagaland. Globalization brought us the medium. It introduced us to the Western cultures, European thoughts. It introduced us to a lot of concepts that we did not study in schools or college, because our life was limited to this small place called Nagaland. And then the internet came. It introduced us to economic enterprises, businesses, success, automobile industries, internet technology, medical advancement. It gave us a lot of ideas which I think purpose us to acknowledge our existence as just more than a tribal people caught in a small state called Nagaland in a remote corner of India's northeast. So all this introduced us to many realities that we previously did not have. Let's say in 1989, when the Act was legislated, when the idea of using liquor was just a moral guideline that we did not see anything beyond what it was. So over the years, the change was that we have been introduced to economic realities, which I believe that the community organizations who have started to support lifting of the Act, they are even seeing these realities. So I believe the changes is mainly in regard to how we are interpreting our life, not based on moral principles, but on economic purposes and economic objectives, Akive.
All right, so now looking at another perspective, I mean, recently when HornbillTV had spoken to the spokesperson of the government of Nagaland, who is also the Minister of Power and Parliamentary Affairs, KG Kenye, he had specifically mentioned that in Nagaland, more than 95% of its resources belong to the people, and that the government of Nagaland hardly owns 5% or even less than 5%.
Right.
Then we've also kept hearing our Honorable Chief Minister Nifurio saying that the state government does not have enough money and it is facing a financial crunch. But on the other hand, when you talk about departments that are under the government, which is education, we've got healthcare, it's the regular citizen, it's the normal Nagas that are expecting so much out of these departments, that if they can improve the education sector, they can improve the healthcare sector, at least some benefits the Naga citizens who live in Nagaland, especially in those remote areas, can benefit from those services, essential services. So in this regard, do you think that the argument of revenue for the state holds, considering that alcohol is often associated with socio-cultural damage, especially to the family culture? And also, is it high time that the problems that are actually being faced by a Naga today should be more on these terms rather than morality, sir?
Oh yeah, speaking as a citizen, not as a Christian, Akive, I would say that I think while I do not support or condemn the conversations here in regard to lifting the act, I speak as a neutral citizen in this regard. The argument of revenue here is in one sense valid also, because like I said, the Hindus have their own moral guidelines in how to live their life. The Muslims have their own too. Each and every member of different religious groups, they have their own beacons. So in this regard, aside from that, they still have economic objectives and purposes on earth as a person, as a citizen, as a father, son, daughter. So when you are putting all these complex issues together and you decide that your moral value is higher, then it's going to be a problem for those who don't have any moral guidelines for their life, let's say agnostics and atheists also. But if these non-religious people believe that the revenue generation aspect of it, the economic prospects of liquor is greater than the moral imperatives of people who support certain religious philosophies, then it's a problem for this particular religious section also. So now, in one way or the other, there will be debates, but the reality is that it is also true that we need some kind of an economic foundation to be able to build businesses, enterprises, and run states and central governments. We need money to run the military. We need money to develop. So liquor is one of these components of an economic society through which the government can exact revenue to be able to give back to the society for its development, for its welfare. So on one side, it is valid to AKV. For instance, 2022, I think it was in 2021, the total revenue that the government of India got from liquor sales from across India was, I hope I get these numbers right, about 2,05,000 crores. That was in 2021. And then in 2022, it was reported that the total revenue that the government of India exacted from liquor sales from across the country was in 2021 it was 1,09,300 crore in 2021, but in 2022 it was more than 2 lakh crore AKV. So there is a lot of money in here, and in Nagaland since 1963, since the act was legislated and put into force, and then opposition started coming in also. I think the revenue collection of the Nagaland government was only around 165 lakh. So that is not even 0.5% of the total revenue that is being generated by other states. And by the way, Mizoram, Nagaland, Bihar and Gujarat are the only dry states in India. So the idea of using the argument of financial prosperity for the community, building enterprises and development for the community by using liquor revenue is in one way totally legitimate also AKV, because without revenue the government also cannot focus on development. Let's say it cannot focus on certain areas where there is no revenue generation, so the government would use the revenue generation from one sector to be used in another. So to be fair, I think the argument of revenue generation from liquor is very valid AKV.
All right, sir. Now, also looking for a solution which could be neutral in every aspect, social, political, economic, and being very neutral and being very rational. According to you and your opinion, what might be the better ways to address whether or not Nagaland should lift the Prohibition Act or not?
AKV, this is a question that we all have been asking, and I wish we had simple an easy answer to this, a simple solution to this, but like you said, there are a lot of complex realities at play here. We cannot just jump in and say lift it or impose it, because there are a lot of factors at play here, especially over the past 20 years. A lot of changes have been happening in Nagaland too, as it has been elsewhere across the world. Now, one thing we need to remember here is that either you want to lift it, or even if you want to lift it, you'll have to ensure that there is a proper mechanism for you to enforce it. Nagaland has been enforcing the Liquor Prohibition Act for a long time. A lot of liquor is already there. We say we have a Prohibition Act in place, but you can just go down to any one of those mineral water bottle shops and you'll find everything that you need there. So we need a proper mechanism. If you are going to lift it, then there has to be mechanism for proper and legitimate licensing. If you are going to lift it, then who is going to get the license to open liquor shops? Where? How many of them? Because we have about 2 million people in Nagaland. If all of them, because we don't have employment opportunities, if all of us decide to start a liquor shop, then how are you going to regulate that? So these are some of the things that we need, enforcement and mechanism. And if you are going to prohibit liquor in Nagaland, then why do we have a lot of pawn shops selling beer? For instance, every day we have police reporting to us that they got this many trucks with liquor, this and that beer, this and that drugs. So enforcement mechanism have to be strengthened, and most important of all, I think family education also help. Somewhere along the way, it might not be related to very hard realities of economics and enforcement, but along the way, I think the Naga family today is a broken family, where we have normalized alcohol use, where we have normalized even cursing and using obscene words in front of elders, where we have normalized pornography. So a lot of things have been messed up at the family level. So I think that is also something that the community leaders and the village councils and even the church should focus on, because you could have total prohibition against anything and anyone, but if your family unit is not strong, then I believe we are going to have problems even in the future. It is not just lifting the act. It is also about, if you lift the act, how are you going to regulate it? And is it good for you? And if it's good for you, how are you going to use it in the future? A lot of questions there, Akivate.
All right, so thank you so much for joining me on the special newsroom and speaking to us about why the NLTP Act was legislated and what impacts it could have if it is lifted. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Akivate.
So that was our associate editor, Alanguli, and he had just mentioned as to why there was a need, especially in the state of Nagaland, to implement the Nagaland Total Liquor Prohibition Act. And now with various civil society organizations and Naga leaders coming out in the open and having the courage to speak about this contentious act has also been another change we have seen in the society over the past few months and years. And the major contention is if revenue is the striking factor as to whether prohibition should be lifted. Associate Editor Alanguli also stressed upon educating at the family level, and also having to reminisce and to even think about topics like this at the family level could also have great ramifications, and it was not just about lifting the Prohibition Act, as problems could come out again later in our future.